Welcome to the American Tradition. I'm your host, pastor, farmer, localist, essayist, Jeremy Mack. Today is Monday, December 28th, 2020. Let's jump into our Better Late Than Never Blitzkrieg weekly roundup. Sorry I wasn't with you on Friday. Not only was it Christmas, but there was a bombing in Nashville, and I live near Nashville, and I also had AT&T for everything. And so I have been living in the 20th century over the last couple of days. It's nice to be back in the 21st century. Let's look at the news. This would have been my weekly roundup for Friday, just coming to you a little bit on Monday. We will have a new weekly roundup on Monday. Opening up with our special interest story. First evidence of microplastics found in human placentas. Who knows what the effects of microplastics inside of the human body will be? Perhaps none, but perhaps they will be significant in the future. Now for our Fatal Conceit story of the week. Fatal Conceit is a book written by F.A. Hayek. It was a book about economics. And the reason that I have chosen Fatal Conceit as a regular theme is because I continue to find fatal conceit as a regular theme in the billionaire oligarch class, of which Mr. Gates is a great example. In F.A. Hayek's book, Fatal Conceit, he made the case that there is no possible way for us all to ever know all the information necessary for us to make significant and complicated economic decisions from a central planning place like a federal government or a Federal Reserve or some other institution. So we have Bill Gates exhibiting fatal conceit, except on a much larger scale. Listen to this story. Bill Gates' savior complex spirals out of control as he funds a sun-dimming plan to save the human race. Evidently, Bill thinks we live in Highlander 2, The Quickening. These people are really thinking about tampering with the Earth's atmosphere. You do not get any more fatally conceited than that. And now that we're talking about science, let's do our Trust the Science segment. So on a regular basis, we're going to have our special interest story of the week. We will have our Fatal Conceit story of the week. And we will have our Trust the Science segment. And in our Trust the Science segment, did Fauci just admit he lied about herd immunity to trick Americans into a vaccine? It turns out, as he is interviewed for the New York Times, he did basically admit that he was lying, originally starting out with the herd immunity numbers, or the naturally occurring immunity that's built up in the human population as we are exposed to a virus. That number was originally about 60%. He marched it right on up from 60 to 65 to 70 to 75 to 80%, and then admitted in a New York Times article that he was basically doing it only so he could get people to buy in to the vaccine. Our next story then comes from the World Health Organization. Remember, we're still on Trust the Science. So why should we trust Mr. Fauci? One is not sure. What about the World Health Organization? Well, the World Health Organization just recently removed herd immunity, or naturally occurring immunity, from their website. Reading from the American Institute for Economic Research, until one day, this strange institution called the World Health Organization, once glorious because it was mainly responsible for the eradication of smallpox, has suddenly decided to delete everything I just wrote. There's an entire section of this story. Remember, all the stories will be in our show notes on the YouTube page, so you can follow the link and read this whole story. But everything I just wrote, from cell biology basics, it has literally changed the science in a Soviet-like way. It has removed, with the delete key, any mention of natural immunities from its website. It has taken the additional step of actually mischaracterizing the structure and functioning of vaccines. I hope no one is very surprised by that. Moving on, as we're still under the Trust the Science theme, we have a new study of about 10 million people that comes to us out of China that shows that what we have as far as asymptomatic spread or reinfection of SARS-CoV-2, or what we call COVID-19, basically is non-existent. And so this is a huge study of 10 million people that demonstrate this. And then we go now to the University of Florida, who also has what we might call a study of studies. And in this study of studies, they studied a lot of these studies that have been done on COVID. And even though there weren't that many on secondary rate attacks and also on asymptomatic spread and reinfection, here's what they give to us at the end of this article. This is published in a small Florida newspaper. The secondary attack rate for asymptomatic index cases was 18%. So the average infection rate for an average COVID is about 7.5%. So COVID does spread faster or has a higher infection rate than your average COVID virus, but we already knew that. So index case was about 18%, and the rate of asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic index cases was 0.7%. Now, although there were few studies in the latter group, the asymptomatic, pre-symptomatic secondary attack rate, so that's people who have the virus but don't have any symptoms, and then pre-symptomatic people who have the virus but haven't developed symptoms yet, secondary attack rate is not statistically different than 0. Let me read that again. Although there were few studies in the latter group, the asymptomatic, pre-symptomatic secondary attack rate is not statistically different from 0, and the confidence interval is technically 0.0 to 4.2, resulting in a change of 3.5 to 4.9%, but attack rates cannot be negative, so it is truncated at 0. That's right, negative. They came up with a negative number. How they do that, I don't know. I'm not a mathematician. I'm giving you what the science says, since we're trusting the science. Let's move on to our rumor mill today. So we're going to look at the Georgia election numbers. You might remember Russell Ramstad. Maybe you don't. He is the head of Allied Security Operations Group. This is the same group that investigated the Antrim County, Michigan glitch, demonstrating that in Antrim County, it was not human error, in fact, that caused that glitch of 6,000 votes to change from President Trump to Vice President Biden, but that, in fact, it was a problem with the software itself. Now, he uploaded this little nugget to Twitter yesterday. If we
well, there was a report yesterday, and we're looking into it, but it looks like it's going to prove out to be correct, that in Savannah, Georgia, there is a smart thermostat in one of the tabulation rooms that is talking to a tabulation server and reporting the votes back to China. And that was traced by a Microsoft engineer. And he brought it to our attention yesterday. So that's being monitored. We already knew that there was a huge overseas problem. And it's not just social media. Your votes in 29 different states, your votes were going to Frankfurt, Germany. They were ending up on a server owned by Clarity Elections in Frankfurt. Well,
so there you have it. A little bit in the rumor mill today out of Georgia. Evidently, we do have some tabulators connected to the internet, and we are watching. They were watching in real time. You saw that. I believe there was a lieutenant colonel or a colonel or some other high-ranking intelligence officer that testified in Arizona about that they could see the data going out of the United States on election night. And so it turns out now that maybe in Georgia, you do have some smart thermostats being tapped into and tabulators on that side. Again, that's just in the rumor mill. We're not making any statements. We're just reporting what the mainstream media will not report or investigate. And jumping over, continuing in our rumor mill, even though I consider things like this less rumor and more factual. Bobby Pitton, you may remember, is a mathematician and financial guru. He's the one who did the demographic studies in Arizona, and he testified before the Arizona state legislature. And when he did, he showed that there was like 40% election growth in voting over like the last few years, but there was only like a 1% a year increase in the actual population. And he was willing to stake his entire life or career that there was fraud in Arizona. Well, now he's been busy working in Pennsylvania. Let me show you what he tweeted out. So the Honorable President of the United States, he's tweeting at President Trump. I have some absolutely stunning news to report regarding Pennsylvania. I examined just over 9 million records, all right, and found and have identified 521,879 unique last names. 245,033, or just under 47% of those last names in Pennsylvania, only belong to one and only person. In other words, there's a lot of uniqueness there. In other words, these 521,879 people, they don't have parents, they don't have brothers, they don't have sisters. And then he started looking at surnames like Smith and Jack and Johnson. He says, once again, no brothers, sisters, aunts, cousins, parents that share this particular last name out of 9 million records. Upon looking at the top 1,000 last names in Pennsylvania, I have discovered that Pennsylvania has 695,430 fewer people in the top 1,000 last names. Literally, there are 14,776 fewer Smiths than there should be. There are 19,591 Williams have gone missing. 30,830 Johnsons are nowhere to be found. 11,656 Jacksons went MIA. What in the world is going on in Pennsylvania? Exactly 500 of the top 1,000 names in Pennsylvania have a deficit in the number of people that should be there. Now, that's very interesting stuff. Mr. Pitton, I believe you pronounce his name, will go on to state that what he believes is it would require a significant state actor in order to carry this kind of stuff out. It's a very sophisticated operation. And when he says sophisticated state actor, he means China, Iran, Russia. So we spent 4 years under a false Russia collusion hoax narrative. And now I can't get, or no one can get, the US media complex to even consider that it might be possible for our elections to be hacked, even though, and I don't have a story on this, I may throw one into the show notes, even though we just underwent a significant hack in our intel information bases by Russia, which has been all over the news for a week. And if we can crack if sophisticated actors can crack from the outside our intel agencies, then we have a real problem, and do not think that it is impossible for them to do work against an election, especially if they are connected to the internet. And why would it be important for that? I have many problems with the current president. I didn't always agree with his stuff, especially domestic. And I'm actually going to say something about that in just a second. But if I was a state actor, like China or Russia or Iran, I certainly would much rather deal with a Joe Biden than I would with a President Trump. Even through Germany and the EU, very unhappy with the current administration over tariffs, over him forcing them through many different means to pay their appropriate dues to NATO so that we don't have to carry them in the world anymore. There are many reasons why you would not want the current administration, and why it would be financially very advantageous to you if you're a foreign actor to not deal with him. I did not like his domestic policies at all, but on his trade policies and foreign policies and American first policies internationally, he has been much better than what we had in the past. Well, speaking of President Trump signs coronavirus relief and government funding bill into law after lengthy delay. Looks like us plebes will be getting some cash. Trump signed the monstrosity of a bill today that gives Americans $600 each. I think that's $600 to each adult. So it's like $1,200 to a household. And I also believe that applies to children that are dependents. So that's what that $600 is all about. This will lead us to our bee sting of the week. Babylon Bee Sting of the week. Americans excitedly anticipate getting paid with their own money, which leads us to another sting, a little sting from Peter Schiff for President Trump. Peter Schiff tweeting, looks like 18 hours ago, as president, at real Donald Trump vetoed just 9 bills. That's right, you heard, his whole 4 years, President Trump vetoed just 9 bills, the fewest number since Warren Harding, who served just 2 years from 1921 to 1923, not since Chester Arthur of 1881 to 1885 as a president who served a full term vetoed fewer bills. You can't drain the swamp while making it deeper. All right, speaking of making that swamp deeper, House to vote on $2,000 stimulus checks after Trump signs COVID relief and funding bill. Not to be outdone by President Trump's populist promises, Pelosi and the Dems are voting on a new stimulus bill today, trying to purchase more American votes for a paltry $2,000. Thank you, Donald and Nancy, for the bread and circuses. Let me end today by giving you something to dream about. This, folks, is the U.S. debt clock. Watch those numbers. Watch them as they fly. This should give you sweet nightmares of what the American government is doing as it creates dependence, what it is doing to its people. And you need to consider that every tick of the clock comes from your children's future wages. Remember to like the American Tradition Facebook page and to subscribe to our YouTube page. We put out an educational video every Tuesday on a topic that we believe is important to be talked about and understood in order to maintain the wonderful traditions and inheritances left to us by our American forefathers and foremothers. We believe it is our responsibility to leave to our children's families, cities, and nations, or to leave to our children families, cities, and nations that are better than what we ourselves received. And we are failing in this because we have been educated with information, but not taught how to think. We will also be making other special edition videos as well that try to read the moral, philosophical, economic, and political tea leaves in order to provoke you to think about your life and the future we are creating as a people. And always, unless there is a bombing in Nashville that knocks out our internet, we will post a weekly news roundup every Friday for you guys. I hope you find this informative. I hope you find this helpful. I hope you find this thought-provoking. And I hope it causes you to think about the things that you have received from the inheritances and from the teachings and from the hard work that have been done and given to us as we receive the American tradition. And it is up to us to maintain the American tradition and to pass that American tradition on. May the Lord richly bless you all. Have a good day. Bye-bye.